Welcome everybody. Very excited to have you here. Just to let you know, I can actually see people when I give the talk. So if you happen to want to turn on your video, it's always great to be able to see how people are reacting and stuff. So just know that if you're eating ribs or something very, very messy on your lunch break, I completely understand. Okay, one other thing I wanted to do. Down at the bottom, you should have a thing that allows you to send reactions, either thumbs up, thumbs down. I think there's turtles. So I just want to make sure everybody has found that. Go ahead and click on something. Okay, we got a thumbs up from Richard. Go ahead and just click on some of those things. I want to see. Okay, and see they pop up on the screen. You should be able to see it for each. Okay, so now that everybody knows where that is, feel free to use those however you feel they might be appropriate or interesting or funny or whatever, or harassing even as we go through the talk. Okay, well, good to see everybody today. We're going to be talking about cumulative flow diagrams. I think these are particularly interesting because they give a what I like to call X-ray vision into being able to see what your project is doing. There's a lot of things that if you're just looking over the data in spreadsheets and in Jira are really, really hard to understand what's going on, but really, really easy if you see them in a cumulative flow diagram. So we're going to just walk through what that looks like. And hopefully give you, if you're using Jira or some other tool and you haven't used cumulative flow diagrams before, hopefully this will give you some understanding to go in and see how you can start using those to help your team. Okay, coming up, not next week, but the week after that, David Marsh, so this will be in 2 weeks, is going to be talking about using AI to build software. He's going to be doing a live demo. So there's all kinds of things I'm sure that can go wrong, but I think this is going to be very interesting. And David Marsh is one of the first Agile coaches I worked with when I started doing coaching for the federal government in the U.S. And so he's got a lot of insight. And he and I were talking. He was explaining to me what he's using AI for. And it's pretty interesting because he's performing the job of a coach just like he always had. He's just working with AI to do it. And it's interesting how important those skills are. And so one of the big takeaways, and the reason I think this will be particularly interesting to this audience, is that a lot of the skills you learn in managing projects using Agile principles and stuff, from what he was showing me, become even more relevant when dealing with AI, which isn't, I don't think that's the intuitive thing that we think of when working with AI. But what he was finding is all the things that can mess up for humans, where you can get ahead of yourself and throw out lots of code and not understand what it does or not be able to get things actually through to the developer. Same thing happens when working with AI. So what he's going to do is show us some of the prompts he uses and some of the approaches he uses to make sure that he's able to guide AI. So he's doing a lot less typing, but he's still using all the Agile principles to make sure he's delivering things slice by slice, writing code tests and things like that. And then let's see, 2 weeks or in March, we've got coming up, Troy McGinnis is coming again. He's been here a few times. He's done a lot of his work and a lot of the talks he's done for us in the past have focused around how to make sure you're working on the next most important thing. I don't know if you remember, but he did years ago, he did something showing how using a similar approach to triaging in ER becomes very valuable in deciding what the next most important thing is to work on. And what he's going to be talking about is how AI changes prioritization and what he's been discovering in some software he's producing of how to determine if something's ready to actually use for AI development stuff. So those are 2 things coming up with guest speakers. I'll have some talks in between there as well, and maybe some other people, but those are ones I would look out for because I think they'll be pretty interesting. Okay, cumulative flow diagrams. We're going to walk through how cumulative flow diagram progresses over time, just to see what that looks like and make sure we understand how it works. So this work process, we've got a number of different things. We've got a backlog, and then we go into the next stage is going to be creating BDD scenarios, what I would consider so executable specifications. If you're working with something where you're creating requirements from the backlog, that might be it. The BDD is representing those requirements just as executable specifications. Then a stage where you're doing development work, and then some stage where it's validating, saying, did we actually, meet the needs of the users? Maybe that's deploying to a pre-prod environment. It doesn't really matter what it is, but some type of validation. And then it gets deployed and it's done when it's in the deployed stage. So the first thing we're looking at here, we have 10 items in the backlog. January 1, 10 items in the backlog. And these, across the bottom, we've just got weeks. So January 1, January 8th, January 15th. So starting out position, there's 10 things that we've identified we want to do, and we haven't done any of them. Now, one kind of weird thing, you'll see a little bit of blue in the bottom going up just for BDD. I couldn't find a good way to make these graphs where I could manage them easily to where they were discrete. So it draws lines between them. But on the line where it's January 1, we're all purple. It's just the backlog. There's 10 items. Then what we do is in January 8th, we pull one of those things over to the BDD column. We're now working on it. And so that happens in January 8th. And then the next week, okay, so how many stories on the backlog on January 1? Well, we've got 10 stories in the backlog. That's the height of this. And then how many stories are in the backlog on January 8th? Well, we've moved one. It's now in the BDD column. So we've now only got 9 stories still in the backlog. I know that if you worked with these before, this may seem rather pedantic, but I want to go through because if anybody doesn't understand what these things represent, and it will become important in when we start looking for bottlenecks and stuff here in a minute. Okay, so how many stories are in the BDD stage on January 8th? Well, we're right between that 0 and 2, so we've got 2 stories in the BDD stage. So there's, whoops, hang on, go back there. So we're measuring the height there. How high is this? Is how many stories are in that particular stage represented by the color at that particular point in time. So one of the stories that was in the backlog has now moved to the BDD stage. Okay, so we move to the next week. At this point, we have actually finished that one story that's in the BDD stage, and now it's in the dev stage. It's moved on to the dev stage, and we pulled another story into the BDD stage. So at this point, I guess that's what I just said, right? Okay, I've got to help myself. Okay, so then we go to the next week. Now that one story that we started first has moved through and it's now in validate, and we've also pulled another one into dev from the BDD stage and something from the backlog into the BDD stage. So we're working our way through here. Now, at this point, I want to ask, so look at this, and we're going to come up with something on Slido. The question I answer is, what just happened for the first time in this diagram that we're working? So the first time this has happened in that graph right there. First deployment. Okay, yes, good. So choose from what we've got here. Something was deployed. Yes. So we completed our first story. We finished our first sprint. We've discombobulated the flux capacitor, or we've increased velocity. And I think everybody's in the chat getting it right. And yes, the thing that we've done. Actually, is this coming up for you so you can? I thought that was supposed to pop up. Okay. Yes, it's working. It should pop up in WebEx. If it doesn't for some reason, you can use your phone on the QR code. And we're going to be giving away a insulated tumbler at the end. So I stick with watching. Which I think, Richard, you won last time, didn't you? I think you won last time. I haven't gotten your address. So make sure you send it to me. Just reply to anything you've gotten from me and we'll get you one, unless you're like anti-tumbler. That's fine too. I'll send you a shirt if you want that instead.
No, you already sent it to me.
Oh, I did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got it. In fact, I've got it right here.
Awesome. This is great marketing. You can win what Richard's got in his hand right there. So keep Slido up. When we get to the end, we'll do a quick contest just covering some of the things that we've talked about here. Okay, so we've completed our first story. This is the first point, something about a flux capacitor. So this is the first point we've gotten to where something is actually earning a return on investment. It's gotten through. It's in the hands of the users now. Okay, so we'll keep going. What happens? We add stories to the backlog as well. So Meg, that's very good. We're keeping this really simple for the first one, but I do have an example of that here in a little bit where the incoming work is fluctuating. In this particular case, and I'm glad you brought that up. In this particular case, we have 10 items. They're not changing. It's just we know what needs to be done. That's just to keep it simple here. But we'll look at that more. So there's a fixed amount of work, and then maybe when we're done, I don't know, everybody goes to Hawaii or something. Okay, so we're moving on, and every week something is moving. We've got, this is very idealized. So every week something will move to the next column. One item will move from the backlog to the BDD column. Whoever's in the BDD column moves over, and it's just incrementally every week moving. Very, very idealized. This isn't how it's going to work in real life, but it makes it easy to understand what's happening here. So how many stories have been completed on February 5th? So looking at this, so we're on February 5th there. How many stories have actually been completed all the way through? They're done. They're earning a return on investment. So yes, we've got two. 2 stories have completed by February 5th, have gone all the way through. Now the next question Okay, yes. So we can measure right here. There were 2 stories that were completed. We can see that because we look at the time axis, and then we look at the color for deployed, and we look at how tall it is. However tall it is. So as things move over, they just continue to stack. And if we draw our line, then we can kind of see where that's coming from. Okay, so we go the next week. Now, how many stories are currently in progress? So in progress, we're going to define as they're not still in the backlog. We've pulled them out of the backlog, and they are not yet deployed. So how many stories are in progress? Give me just a minute. I'm going to open the window here. This is a new house to us, and I haven't figured out how to control the air in this room. It's very hot. So I'm going to open the window here in just a second. See if that helps a little bit. It's very cold in some rooms and hot in others, and I haven't figured out what levers to pull everywhere. Okay, yes, 3 stories are in progress because we've got right here. There's 3, right? We're working on. We're about to finish story number 3, and have just pulled in story number. I think that will be 6. Can't remember if it's 6 or maybe it's 4 and 6. Anyway, there's 3 of them in progress. So we can look at the height of that, which means if the height of this starts growing, then we've got more work in progress. If it starts shrinking, then we've got less work in progress. And we'll look at some examples of that here in a minute. Okay, so we're continuing to move across. So looking at this graph, how long does dev work take on average? How long does it take to finish something that's in the dev column, or which is the green there? Is it 6 weeks, 10 sprints, 1 week, 2 sprints? How long does it take for dev work on average? So yes, very good. It's 1 week. Now we've got some people saying 2 sprints here. Keep in mind, we're not looking at how much it takes to go through everything. With just that green band is the dev work. So if we look here, and this is I'm glad we're going through this because some of this is kind of confusing until you see it. So these are all week-long increments. And so from January 15th to January 22nd, 1 week, whatever came into dev in that week left out of dev. That one story that came in also went out and moved on to the next stage. Now, the total cycle time, which we'll look at in a minute, would be all of these things: BDD, dev, and validation. But right now, we're just talking about stuff in the dev column. Probably a little bit of an overloaded term, dev, if we consider all of it to be the development process. Okay, so then we get to this point. So how long does it take to fully complete a story based on looking at this graph? So how long does it take from the time we start on it until the time it's in dev and earning a return on investment? How long does it take to complete a story? So it looks like everyone's saying 3 weeks, and I think that looks right. Here we'll throw some things up on the so here it's actually showing how far it takes, and yes, that's 3 weeks from the time it comes in till the time something goes out. Now we're only dealing with 1 story at a time. One thing I'd like to point out is this is the average time from when something comes in to when it goes out. You could, in theory, have a situation where 1 story comes in and you just never work on it, and it's just there if you've got multiple stories. In our idealized thing here, we're only dealing with 1 story at a time, so that's not happening. And the main reason, the only thing I want to point that out for is because it still matters how you still may want to look at your stories and say, how long has this been in this column? Because if you've got multiple stories in there, it could be the same story just kind of floating and it's not getting done. It either needs to be canceled or finished. So here we're showing that these are all 3 weeks, right? Every week we finish something that has been in progress for 3 weeks on average, according to the chart. Okay, so this is the cycle time. This is how long it takes for work to move through the entire process, coming out of the backlog and then moving into deployed where it's finished. Okay, so now this is a very idealized cumulative flow diagram. So now let's deal with a less idealized situation and see what it actually tells us. Like how would it encourage us to work differently, or what would it point to? So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, what if we were to double the effort in creating BDD scenarios? We're going to take the amount of effort, whatever that effort is, and we're going to say we have twice as much effort going into creating BDD scenarios, and we're going to cut the amount of time we spend on dev work in half. Now, I would suggest you do this, but let's say that's the situation we're in for whatever reason. So now we've got a graph that looks something like this. So what's happening in this process? So how would you describe what's happening? That dev work is finishing too fast for downstream processes. Upstream development is producing work faster than dev can complete it. Deployment is taking too long. Validation needs more automation, or work isn't moving out of BDD. Which one of those do you think describes what's here? Right. So it looks like, so we say upstream work is completing work faster than dev can complete it. That could be valid too. And I'm not trying to say there's a right answer here. Based on what we've said, I think both of those things people are voting for are true. So we've said work isn't moving out of the BDD state because we've cut our development time in half. So the thing I want to point out is because we know what's happening, we defined what's happening, we can look at this and say, oh, BDD process is completing stuff. It's there. Now, it could be that the BDD process is actually just taking on work really, really fast and not actually completing it. That could happen from here because we're not really clear just by looking at the graph why it isn't moving from BDD to dev. Should validate start halfway through the week if dev is, maybe we're just working on weekly increments, but yes, we could be in kind of a weird situation there. If we are more granular, which you get if you're looking at Jira, you'll get more details than we get here. It was kind of difficult to figure out a way to go ahead and represent this to where I could make any changes to it easily, without creating tons of tickets in Jira. So I actually did this with Excel, which is why we're just on kind of a weekly basis. So upstream development is producing work faster than dev can complete it. So in this case, dev isn't actually taking the work in. It's taking work in and completing it just working one story at a time, which is probably reasonable for it since its capacity has been cut in half. So in this case, some of those things in the BDD column are done and waiting for dev to pull them in. Now, we could have a more complicated CFD that's actually showing us when the work is done in BDD and dev is waiting for dev to pull it. So we might have different. There could be another thing in here showing that maybe because probably what's happening is the BDD thing is completing stuff as it goes, and so there's this wide gap of things that are just kind of sitting there waiting for dev. If we had the more details of those different states, that would be useful. And when you're doing stuff in Jira, those are things that you might, or whatever tool you're using, based on my poll, most people are using Jira. A lot of you would like to be using sticky notes on your boss's wall, but
Alexa, leave notification.
Based on, hang on, let me mute people here just to make sure nothing embarrassing happens. So you could break these down to have better visibility of what's going on. When I've set up Jira boards to really follow Kanban, usually what I do is I've got a couple states. I've got the state represented on the board as like the dev state or the BDD state or the validate state. But then within that, I've actually got three things happening. There's one saying it's completed that state and it's ready to pull. There's another state that means it's being worked on. And then there's another one that means it's blocked. And so those things would all kind of show up in here if you were creating that level of granularity. Okay, so we're building up inventory in the BDD column because we've done our capacity. So there's lots of stuff that's showing up there that's done and waiting for dev based on what we said was happening. If we're just looking at the chart and we don't know exactly what has changed, we might have to go figure out if the BDD work is being completed or if it's a matter of they're just like starting a bunch of things and not finishing it. Dev doesn't have the capacity to keep up. Dev's steadily working through everything, but they're not actually keeping up. Now, the other thing that could happen is Dev could start pulling stuff in without actually finishing it. In that case, this would show up as expansion in the green rather than expansion in the blue. And we'd have to dig in and see what exactly was going on. But the point is you can look at this and see something's not right. We're not actually increasing our flow is not doing what it did before. So BDD is pulling in 2 new stories every single week and working on them. And from what we said, they're actually finishing it. But dev's only able to work on one news story every 2 weeks because we cut their capacity in half. It takes the dev stage 2 weeks to finish work on a story. And the BDD stage is getting too far ahead. Now, every other week, the validate stage runs out of work, right? Because they're waiting for something for dev that takes 2 weeks, and when they get it, they complete it in 1 week. So that showing where that orange is coming down to 0, and this is where the lines angling make it a little bit harder to see what's going on. But we're actually, that particular stage, the validate stage, is starving for work. There's capacity there, at least based on how we had worked before, that isn't being used. We're not getting smooth flow to that. Through that. Now, if this is an integrated team where they are, everybody's jumping back and forth, working on things, maybe that doesn't matter. However, if we are paying people to validate and they're just sitting around and twiddling their thumbs every other week, this is a very poor use of resources. Not sure what's the difference between those. Okay. So, which one of these graphs shows the most amount of time spent working? And let's look at that. So if we assume that each stage takes in our idealized graph over here, if we assume that each stage takes the same amount of time and effort, and we doubled what we have on BDD and cut in half what we have on dev, we're in a situation where this graph actually represents 12.5 more effort. So the one on the right is producing more, but the one on the left is the one that we're actually spending more time doing. And this is very interesting because it seems like we've actually increased the amount of work being done by 12.5% for the one on the left. However, we've actually reduced the amount of work we're delivering significantly. Because over here, this one's producing 125% more value delivered. Because, let's see, what's this one? When we get to the end of it on the one where we're not having good flow, it looks like we've delivered 4 stories by the end of this time period. Whereas this other one, that it's very, very smooth, we've delivered 9. And this is where I think we really get that X-ray vision thing in looking at this, because when we look at this, we can see what's happening. And it's very, very clear that one of these is producing a lot more than the others. The fact that and not represented in the graph is how much time was actually spent, but the way that we got these worst results was actually increasing the amount of work being done. And this is really, really important because it's very easy for teams to be extremely busy. You know, they're working really, really, really hard, but getting results that look like this one over here, when they could be working sometimes even a lot less and getting results like this one up here. And that's why the cumulative flow diagram is really, really helpful, because it can help point out places where that is happening and help show you where to go in, you know, that X-ray vision, go in and look and say, oh, okay, why does this look like this? Let's go figure it out and see if we can get to something where it's more smoothly delivering all the way through. Because this is very, very significant, right? We're doing less work and producing 125, not just 25% more, but 125% more work is being delivered and getting to the point of earning a return on investment. Now, one thing that may happen, and this is a conversation I've had with teams before, is they look at something like this over here where it's something like, well, it's okay, we'll all work out eventually. But if you look at unless something changes, it won't, right? We'll just keep on creating BDD scenarios. And as a matter of fact, it will actually get worse, because some of those scenarios will be done so far ahead of time that by the time we get ready to work on them, they'll either be out of date, or people will have forgotten what was in them, or things have changed and they're no longer valid for the way that they were. So the delivery on this, the one on the left, will probably get worse over time instead of getting better. And the big takeaway I would have is the cumulative flow diagram helps you see how you're actually delivering work all the way through to where you're getting a return on investment. It's very, very easy for teams to get focused on whether or not everybody's staying busy and completely lose sight of how are we delivering work all the way through. The cumulative flow diagram also lets you see how are we delivering work from one stage to the next, and is that being done in a way that helps optimize to make sure each stage has the work that it needs, but it has the work that they need and it's smoothly flowing all the way through. So how can we solve this? So in this particular case, what we would need to do is we need to say, okay, look, we've got too much capacity in the BDD column. We're spending so if it's if it's a cross-functional team, we need to take some of the people that are working on that and have them work on the dev. If it's not a cross-functional team and these are actually different people, what I would start doing is looking and saying, are there other teams that are in the opposite situation? What if we find another team that needs more, where they're starved for work, where the thing that's slowing them down is they don't have BDD capacity to deliver stuff. And maybe there's a possibility of training people or integrating some things, because what we need to do is we need to stop producing BDD scenarios so quickly, and we need to start increasing our capacity to do dev work. And the other thing that we should do, probably look at, is using a pull system will actually fix some of this and make it even easier to see, oh, look, we've got a bunch of people sitting around here. They don't have anything to do. Can they go help somewhere else, or do we need to reorganize our team? So in this smooth flow scenario, we end up with 9 stories that are earning a return on investment at the end of the period. In the other one, we have 4. That's where that 125% comes from. So imagine you were choosing a factory to invest in. Which type of CFD would you want to see for the work moving through the line? Oops, it's not going to show us. Okay, so yes, we want the smooth flow, because if you're in a factory and you were looking out, and let's say the factory makes cars or something like that, and they had 10,000 bumpers all piled up just sitting there with nowhere to go, and other people just trying to get through putting the headlights on or whatever, and the people downstream from them are just waiting, doing nothing because they can't get the car with the headlights put in, just making stuff up. That would be really easy to see. You start tripping over physical bumpers if they're just sitting around in your warehouse. With software, it's really easy to miss what's happening because it all just kind of goes out of mind. It's not easy to see. That's what the cumulative flow diagram does, is it helps show you where stuff's piling up in ways that in a factory would be really easy to see because you'd actually be tripping over it and running out of space. Okay, so one thing to think about with this, and this is a whole other thing, I probably should do the Kanban talk again, but in thinking of pull systems will solve a lot of these things, or at least make it easier to see what's going on. So pull systems allow you to balance the demand and the capacity. So what you end up doing, and it avoids some of the problems that this CFD is showing, or it causes the pain in other ways that makes it easier to correct. So with a pull system, what you do is when one stage pulls in work, it sends a signal upstream to deliver another. So in that case, if dev work is working on something and they know they've got something to work on next, you wouldn't be getting people to do other BDD scenarios. You wouldn't be asking for them to work on that. You'd probably get them to come help you deliver the dev work. And there's different ways of doing this. Maybe you need a buffer. You may find you need a buffer of 1 or 2 items or whatever that happens to look like to handle the ups and downs of the flow and people going on vacation and things. But what you don't want to do is that graph where it's just going like this. A pull system will avoid that type of thing happening as you tune it. So it's the opposite of pushing work into the system, which is what we're seeing with the BDD scenario, where we just keep pulling work in and pushing it into the system without actually focusing on the flow all the way through. So the cumulative flow diagram helps show how much work needs to be requested in order to create a smooth flow. Okay, so that's the one that we were looking at with this. So let's look at another example, and somebody asked about this earlier. So here's another cumulative flow diagram. Now we've got the same smooth flow of our delivery, but we have something that's different. In this case, and probably more likely what you're gonna see, is we've got different capacity coming in. We've got, they ask for stuff, we deliver it, and then they ask for something else, and then they don't ask anything for a while, and we start to catch up, and then they ask for some other things. So in thinking about how a CFD helps us think about the future, if we look at this and we say, looking at what I see, if I project out, I can make some pretty good guesses about what's likely to happen in the future. So what would you guess might happen in the future from what we see right here? Possible thing, there's not necessarily right answer. We need to invest more effort to write BDD scenarios. We may temporarily run out of things to work on. We need to add developers, or we may finish all the work. So yes, we may temporarily run out of things to work on. We probably don't need to add developers in this particular situation because it looks like we're keeping up with the demand. If we add more developers, we will probably be more likely to get in a situation where we temporarily run out of things to work. As far as we may finish all the work and they don't need us anymore, maybe, but the history we have is showing that they keep giving us work to do. It's just that we're catching up with it so fast that there's not necessarily there's not a lot of buffer between what they ask for and who we work on, which may be great. This may work really, really well, but it also means we may get into a situation where they haven't asked for anything and we've delivered it and gotten it all the way through. That looks like that's likely to happen. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What we might consider doing is there may be some technical debt items that we want to put on the backlog at a lower priority. So if we ever run out, it's like, oh, here's something that's will be really valuable to us in the long term, but we're not willing to give up what the customer's asking for to do this. Well, if we run out things the customer's asking for, we can deliver that and increase our delivery capability. The other issue with this that's kind of worth thinking about too is when we have a backlog that has this few things on it, I would want to ask, do we have enough items in our backlog that our prioritization is helping us choose the best thing? Or is it possible we're getting down to things that are not very valuable just because we're not, however the backlog's being filled, they need to get stuff into it sooner. Like there's stuff that the user knows would be valuable, but it's just not making its way. You know, we only need to fill up the backlog every 4 weeks or something. And maybe we need to invest in more of filling out the backlog so we can make sure that we're working on higher return on investment items. Because in this case, we may be getting to the point where there's things that are lower investment, even if the organization knows of something that's higher investment, and we're just not getting to it. Okay, so in this case, the backlog's growing and it's coming in kind of unevenly. In this case, we're one story away from running out and not having anything for the BDD to do in the BDD scenario creation stage. Might not be a bad thing. There might be lots of other things to work on, but so also looking at this, what is our, so this is a different one, it's changed. So using our newly acquired X-ray vision, so look at this and ask yourself, what is happening here? What is the bottleneck in this what we're seeing here? Is our bottleneck development? Is it validation? Is it moving between validation and deployed? Or is it deployment? Now, unlike the situation that we looked at before, we haven't really said what's going on here, right? We haven't really stated why this has happened. I haven't, maybe we've added a bunch of people to validate, who knows? We knew that for the other one. This one, we don't know. So it may be a little bit more ambiguous. So in looking at this, our bottleneck looks like it is either that we're pulling stuff into validation faster than it's leaving. That's what we know from looking at this. And there could be a number of reasons, but the main thing that we're seeing is we're pulling stuff in faster than it's moving out to deploy. That's really the thing we know. Most people got that. Now, the problem very likely might be validation. It might be that this is taking longer. It could be that we're producing bugs are being discovered in validation, and we're just keeping it there while we fix it. It could also be that we're not able to get it out into the deployment stage. And this is where if we were to break these up into more granular, we might be able to see like, oh, this finished validation and then it's sitting in this buffer waiting to go to deployment. Those are things we could get from this if we were to make it more granular, but it's harder just to represent here. So the stuff that we know is things aren't moving from validation to deploy. There could be a number of reasons for it. We can probably easily find if we go and just see what the team's doing. Okay, so work isn't moving from validate to deploy. It might be a deployment issue or it might be a validation issue, but we've got a pretty good idea of why we're not getting more things into return to get a return on investment. Okay, so what does this graph tell us about the future though? So if we look at this, do we look at this graph and say we'll deliver faster in the future? So we'll all catch up based on what we're seeing. Does it tell us that current work may never be deployed? Does it tell us developers are going to start looking for other jobs? Or does it tell us the cafeteria food quality is going to go down? Now, those might all be things that happen, maybe. But yes, we've got current work may never be deployed. It's starting to look like that, right? The work that's being pulled right now, based on the slope of that deployment growth, we might get to a point where this is never going to get deployed. We don't have a lot of evidence that our deployment process is keeping up with what's happening in validation. So it took 4 weeks. So if we measure across here, we can see how long did it take us to deliver our first story. Well, it took 4 weeks. It took a week in the BDD scenario stage, a week in dev, 2 weeks in validation, and then we deployed it. So that took 4 weeks. However, the last thing that we deployed took 8 weeks. So the thing we deployed on March 19th, we started on January 22nd. So that was 8 weeks. Well, that's double the time from the first one. And if we come up and look now, nothing in the last week, nothing from the last 8 weeks has been delivered at all. So we're very much in a place where we might get to a point that we're not able to deliver anything. So questions we'd ask would be, are we discovering a bunch of bugs in the code? Is that what this is revealing? Or do we need to invest in deployment automation? Maybe it was really easy to deploy things early on because we did it manually and it was simple, but now we've deployed it. Now we have enough code that it's really, really complicated to deploy. And maybe the team is saying it's so hard to deploy, we're going to wait and batch a bunch of stuff together and only do it every 8 weeks or something like that, or it's just too painful. So maybe we need to invest in deployment automation to keep the flow smooth. Other thing could have happened. Maybe the guy that knows how to deploy it quit when it got different. He got fed up with the cafeteria food and went got a different job somewhere else. Who knows? So what would happen in a pull system like we described? Well, yes, whip limit on validate. Yes, and in a pull system, it would kind of give us that because we wouldn't have started more work until all the other work had flowed all the way through. So in a pull system, we would have deployed stuff, and then when we didn't deploy anything, we would have said, don't give me anything new for validate. And validate would have told Dev, don't give me anything new because we're not ready for it. And Dev would have told BDD, don't give me anything new. And BDD would have not pulled anything in from the backlog. So what should have happened is you've got all these people that had been working on those things. And kind of like if you think of the Toyota example where, something's not working right. So they pull the wire and it stops everything. Well, when the line stops, people start wandering upstream to see what's going, or downstream somewhere and see what's going on. How can we help move this so things move again? So if we actually stopped all of our work in order to fix the problem that we're starting to see in a pull system, we could fix it, automate it, whatever it needs to happen, and then go back and move back to having smooth flow going through. So that's where the pull system can be really valuable. And like somebody mentioned, the whip limit, because that puts us in a position where we're saying we're going to follow the discipline of making sure we don't just keep starting new work. I was working with a team a while back, and they were at the end of their sprint, they were talking about how great it was because they had started everything. Like there was no story that had not been started in the sprint. Now they had a huge number of things in process, but everything had been started. They were seeing that as a success because of how their metrics were presented. And so what I started talking about is like, okay, yes, there's nothing waiting to be started, but you've got 20 or 30 things that are still in flight. If we could have delivered 15 of those things and had 15 that you didn't start, that actually would have been more success because you would have delivered something. Even if we had delivered 5 of those things instead of starting all 30 of them, that would have been more success. But with the way the organization worked, it was considered more successful to make sure that we showed that our numbers were more. I think the idea was that their estimates for their sprints were more accurate if there was nothing that they hadn't started. It was just and so you get in these weird situations if you're not getting the full picture, which is what I think CFDs do really well. Okay, so now chance to win an AgileLnL tumbler, laser cut, awesome. Richard's a great model for it. His is working well for him. Evidently, he's even got it at work. Hopefully, it's keeping him well hydrated with whatever his beverage of choice is. So we're going to do that. So go to the if you bring up the Slido, we'll do that in just a second, and we'll mention two things. One, if your team needs help improving flow, if some of the stuff you're looking at, and you're like, hey, we would really like to have somebody come work with on some of those things. Reach out, let's talk. If I would be a good fit for what you're doing, I'd love to work with your team. On the other hand, if you're looking at this thing, well, we can't get Mark in to help, but we'd like to know more about a particular aspect of this, let me know. I'd love to try to do an Agile Lunch and Learn on it if enough people are interested in the same topic. And just a reminder, and this will be important for the chance to win something here. Dave Marsh is coming up in 2 weeks to talk about building software with AI one thin slice at a time. And then in March, we've got Troy coming to talk about how prioritization changes when you're working with AI. Okay, so join the quiz and we will ask 5 questions and you can win Agile Lunch and Learn Tumblr. Okay, so I'll give a few seconds for everybody to join. Okay, so it should have popped up on the side. If it's not, just go to that QR code with your phone. And we'll get started in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, first question. What does CFD stand for? Cumulus fluoride dioxide, concurrent flux diomedes, or cumulative flow diagram? And based on feedback from last week, I have added an extra 10 seconds. So hopefully you have time to decide which of these it is. Three seconds remaining. And yes, oh, everybody got it. Cumulative flow diagram. Very good. Okay. I need harder questions. What do we get measuring from left to right across the graph? So if we're measuring like this, what can we measure? Do we measure the return on investment? Do we measure the average time to move from one state to the next? Or do we measure the number of items in progress? So moving from left to right, what are we actually measuring? So return on investment, average time to move from one state to another, or number of items in progress. And yes, average time to move from one state to the next. Because remember, across the bottom is our dates. And so when something comes into, it will come in on one date. And then when we move away from that, we move out. So when we're measuring, like we want to know how long, what our cycle time is, we start with the first place that work came in and measure till that work moves over to being deployed. We measure across like that, and that will give us the average time it takes for our cycle time if we're measuring across all the states or any individual state, how long it takes for when work comes in, what's the average length of time before it moves back out again. Okay, Mavin's in the top spot, followed by Richard, Phil, Allison, and Chris L. How do we get by what do we get by measuring from top to bottom? So we're doing cross, so if we're measuring top to bottom, what do we get? Do we get the average cycle time? Do we get how many items are in a particular state or states at that point in time? Do we get how many people are working on the process? Or do we get the average return on investment for that stage? So this is measuring up and down. What do we get for measuring up and down? So yes, we get how many items are in a particular state or states at that point in time. So keep in mind, the up and down axis is the number of stories. So that's why it's cumulative, because it builds up, and the up and down axis builds up over time with the number of stories. The average cycle time is represented in left and right. So that's going to be back and forth. So we measured across left and right for average cycle time, and we measure up and down to find out how many items are in a particular state or group of states. Mav's in the top, followed by Richard, Phil, Allison, and Chris L. Next question. What problem do you see in this graph? So do you prefer neon colors? That may or may, I'll give you a hint, that's not the answer I'm looking for. There isn't enough work in the backlog. Is it the items are building up in BDD state and not moving to dev? Or is the problem that deployment is not automated? So if you look at this graph, what's the thing that you would feel you need to go investigate? And it's not the neon colors. Even if you do prefer neon. Okay, yeah, so items are building up in the BDD state and not moving on to dev. So the not enough work in the backlog, if we look at the backlog, we don't see any place that we're running out of work. So that purple represented by the backlog isn't impeding us, at least yet. Now, if we fix these other things, maybe we'll get to a point where that will become an issue, but right now it's not. Okay, we've got Mavin, Richard, Phil, Allison, and Chris L. And okay, I think it's the last question. What is Dave Marsh speaking about on the 24th? Is he going to demonstrate how to make AI more friendly? A live demonstration of snake charming and firewalking? Tips for outdoor survival for the AI apocalypse? Or a live demonstration building software and slices with AI? I would love to see Dave do a live demonstration of snake charming and firewalking, but that might take some more convincing. So yes, a live demonstration of building slices with AI. Very good. And our winner is Mavin. Top spot there. Very, very good. Followed by Jer, Rich, Lisa, and Richard. So Mavin, send a reply to whatever anything I've sent to you, or I'll type my email in the chat real fast here. So if anyone wants to reach out, feel free to reach out. I have an email. Mavin, send me your address and I will get that to you. If you're not in the US, let me know and we will try to get you something. I may have more trouble sending internationally, but I'll try to get you something of value for your hard work and great competitiveness. Interesting. According to this talk, which is not a measurement that can help improve flow, was the hardest. You know what? I think that may have been pulling from something else, but okay, well, I'm going to stop the live streaming here, and I'll stick around for a while. If anybody has any questions, I would love to chat. Thank you so much for coming. Stop the streaming here.